Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I think it's about time we can review another basically review. This time around, we can talk about none other than one of my all-time favorite movies, and personally, one of these movies I watched as a kid, Harriet the Spy. Yes, folks, I basically want to talk about maybe a little personal about the film itself and my experience basically watching it, and of course, Richard, why this movie has been one of my all-time favorites. So that's what we're going to talk about today on Friends Want to Be Reviews. Welcome back. Okie dokie. Well, what can I say about Harriet the Spy? It's probably been one of the most unknowing and non-based fictional books of all time. Thanks to, of course, the reviews we excuse. I guess originally my thoughts about the book and generally, and the film simultaneously, it's quite not the same as the book tells it. Now, the reason why I mentioned this, and the reason why I'm telling you this, is because, well, the book itself is actually pretty well a little bit more kind of harsh in many ways, I mean, there's some moments that you find it very well fascinating, about reading it. Now, we do see the part, that we all know that a young disabled 11-year-old girl who wants to become as a writer. And of course, she basically goes around in her neighborhood in New York City, basically just spies around her, relatives, well, not relatives, spies around our neighborhood, and eventually, basically write down everything that she knows in her trusted basically little notebook. Now, for me, how I got involved in basically reading the book was somehow originally it pretty much got to me understanding about writing, journaling, and everything else because back in the early course of the 90s, I used to write my own kind of spy notebooks back in that time, and I kind of found this book very well interesting to me, to basically understand about how children react when they are feel emotional or feel kind of lonely or basically don't have really no communicating whatsoever with their friends. It's pretty obvious why this book is pretty much generated to me to understand about basically as a child. But the only thing I will say about the film itself is there are some elements that you find very well fascinating, with which, of course, in a scene wherein, we see trusted little big character Sport played by, I forgot what his name was, but he plays by that character Richard somewhere, plays that guy Richard, whatever his name is. But he goes to the local food grocery store, and he's basically, of course, paying his groceries, like his milk, his cheese, and all this stuff that he's basically trying to pay off, or basically buy some food for his father and everything else. And it's pretty obvious that you look at the characters very well listed because, for Harriet, she's more as the know-it-all, trying to know everything about what's going on in the world and everything else. And she wants to know everything that she knows by simply write down in her notebook. For Sport, himself, he's more as a kind of the main, basically supporting character who just basically, tried to be supportive and everything else, and of course, basically living on him with his, basically his divorced father, who is becoming as a writer himself, realize that he's trying to help out with with the bills, of course, with the cooking and everything else, which, everybody day in life does that in their own life. For myself, I do that too, because for my own personal reference of my own life, I used to be like that kind of way because, me and my mother never had much money back in the time when I was getting a little bit older. We never had much more food based on the table. I mean, we wasn't really poor. We wasn't seriously was poor and loneliness and of course homeless. We were simply trying to live by day, richly everyday life by saving enough money for food and basically, of course, pay the bills. Because of course, Richard, for support him being as a supporting character, I really find him very well relatable because, for everyday life where we live in, we always have a moment that we are just basically unmentionably just cannot afford enough for other people that we basically are, of course, basically generated from what is comes around. So for the book, I really find it very well, fun to read because it's not just basically, the temper tantrums of based off a child, which it's a very well driven basically story because Louise Riscus is basically saying that the characters, like of course Harriet, she's very well, I don't want to say bullied, but also being real, like herself, and basically was fool herself by simply actually kind of really go on and basically do things on her own. Because, of course, back in the early 60s, Louise was trying to, of course, create a story that, many children can naturally can relate to, or, can parents really advise how children react to other children usually towards age and gender. And it's pretty obvious that the story is quite driven. The only thing I will base about bad thing about it is because we do see Harriet have these temper tantrums. Like she's causing basic use of words, certain language that probably maybe child never should have. Basically going to a psychotherapist. I mean, there's a psychotherapist both the book and the movie simultaneously because, I mean, you don't really have that kind of way with many other children's books because, Louise, she's very well considered as a writer who is trying to get inside the material of a child, and I think that's what driven to me when I started reading it, and I was very well kind of fascinated of it. And it's pretty obvious that she's really going on and focused on Richard, even if she is basically have much more common sense between basically the parents and the basically child himself. So, for my theory based towards the book and the movie, it's sort of like really just basically having your kids trying to learn from the experience and basically having an tangible experience about, being and dealing with life, and actually have a corporate basis with your family and friends. Now, I will say for the movie, on the other hand, is that it's pretty obvious it's very well similar towards the book. But here's the difference. And I don't think that books don't really follow the movie simultaneously because the books are very well driven towards it, especially for Harry Potter. I mean, Harry Potter has been very well considered for popularity towards the books, and very well getting a ton of basically franchise based on the movies. Well, I'll get to that original into the later original on originally. But the real thing I will say about the movie is, it's very obvious that you don't get a driven movies somewhere like this towards the book. While the movie is more really some elements of basic fun and just goofiness and just a little bit of whack and a little bit of sadness, which is scenes that you're watching, it's pretty well driven, really, just a little bit. The only thing difference about the movie is just because there are some parts that are not really a kind of like mood to me. And I know a lot of people who have watched the movie and basically read the book simultaneously don't necessarily have to take a chance to just basically, tell the children originally that, even when you are different, you feel kind of different. You feel kind of odd, Rishi, in your way. Because Harriet and, and other basic characters in the book and the film itself are quite different, Rishi, in so many ways. Like, of course, we have the boy with the purple socks, who is basically never talks eventually until at the end of the movie and the end of the book. It's pretty obvious that he does speak up his mind about how he feels about, Harriet has become as a great scientific writer. She maybe wrote very bad things to all the things in her notebook, but she basically is, of course, as an average of a child, she's basically learning this kind of experience, and I think that's quite really interesting to me, Richard, from my understanding, because not even often you don't have a sort of certain feel basically towards the characters. But here's the thing I hate about Richard that they did in the film. Now, we all know in the actual story, in Release story, we do see, of course, Rachel and Marion have, very well symbol for friendship, because in the actual story, Marion was, well, I guess, Rachel Henderson actually took Harriet's notebook while they were just playing in the park and playing tag and everything else. That was actually in the story. But in the film, the actual film is actually quite different, Richard. Now, a lot of people find it very well kind of like a nitpick Richard way that it's supposed to be Rachel Henderson getting Harriet's notebook, not Marion. But it plays in both ways, because you do get that same element of the scene in the book, because in that way you do have that Richard insurance remnant to it. But the big thing that I like about it necessarily is that you have that undimensional feel of seeing two characters that basically in the actual story are very well in the story, are actually in a different type of area. So I think that the director, I forgot what her name was, who directed this movie, but she was playing it and she wanted to make it a little different twist to make it more friendly, a little bit more kind of like different between the book, because the book is very well just for storytelling, and very well kind of this basically will kind of work, but in a very this kind of do it in a very different way. So for that, it's pretty obvious that you don't get that Richard scene basically in the book. Now, while the book it really follows love Richard, there are some basic characters that they forgot to let off in the actual story. Like, of course, we have the Robinsons characters. The Robinson, couple are actually just into all of the perfect things, have a perfect house, perfect couch, and everything else, all this perfect life they have originally, and that explains something towards the book. While in the film, it never mentioned of that originally. But to be realistically, there was a big version that the director was going to try to put the Robinson couple in the film. But to be fair and to be all honestly, it didn't work out very well. So we just basically got the main characters. Like, of course, we do have, of course, Harriet's parents, of course, the children, of course, Sport, Jeannie, Rachel Henderson, Marion Hawthorne, Pinky Whitehead. I'll get to Pinky Whitehead originally, hopefully. Boy with Purple Socks, Carrie Anthony, what was it originally? Laura Peterson, of course, and Bev Ellen. And of course we have the lovely teacher, Miss Elson. And of course, Old Gully, which is basically the main character. And we have also basically other basic characters that many people find that very well. There are some characters that they forgot to left off. Of course, I don't know what his name was, but he's actually the character originally in the story that he's basically eating so much food and in the back and trying to basically not to have out with the, of course, the basically Franklin's parents who run the basically Hong Kong food grocery department. And in the actual basic story, it does play that way, because we do see, of course, the Hong Kong's family, Jackie, Frankie, I don't know how to basically say, Frankie, who is trying to, of course, want to borrow his parents' truck, and actually, of course, basically ran the truck over for some reason, in the actual story and actually in the film, actually getting himself originally in a car wreck. And it's pretty obvious the scene that really seen originally. It's pretty well, very well driven. Just check it out. You probably will enjoy it and probably will understand about the difference between the actual scene in that way. But I think the one character I was very kind of fun with, basically, and this was kind of really, I was really interesting too, because this is not how often that you get Bishop. There's so many good characters you could relate to. Like, of course, Sport, I can relate to him because he's more as the man of the house who's trying to, of course, do the cleaning, do the cooking, and of course do the bills that he basically wants to become as a CPA, which is a counterfeit person who makes sure that keeps tracks of the money, which is that's spent towards basically towards the book and towards the film simultaneously. And of course, that really being said, it's pretty obvious that many people find that Sport was never really the main purpose of the character. He actually has his own book his actual own book. If you definitely check his book out, it's pretty well darn good originally. I haven't read it originally. I know it's quite really an interesting book, and I would love to basically have that originally in my collection. But really, just the only thing I'm just very kind of constant is basically just Harriet itself, which, you know, I can really relate to her because, you know, back in the early 90s, I was always kind of like finding myself of what I want to do with my life. As of course, when you're a child, you don't know how you basically enjoy yourself and how you basically, you know, find yourself in your way. That doesn't mean I wasn't antisocial. I was just basically, you know, social in my own way, which of course having family around or because having, you know, relatives around, whatever. It just kind of goes shows that I just kind of weigh towards my own self and in my own personal life. And pretty much obvious why I think it is pretty that got to me reading this book, and it got to me to understand about, of course, about the meanings of life. But generally speaking, it wasn't really because I didn't thought Richard had a very wonderful or basically happy or unhappy life. It was just because, you know, I had a steady, slow pace of life which I had on my own. So, yeah. But the real question is, I'd like to basically mention for you guys, basically whoever read this book and you watched the movie simultaneously, is that the movie is not quite good. I mean, it is good in some parts when you're watching it and actually understand about it originally and generally. But to be fair, it's quite a little bit of difference because while the book is really straightforward and actually a little bit understand about each character basically goes along with the story, the movie is just played for fun. And that's not a bad thing, but the only thing I find pretty obvious is that sometimes you don't know if you relate to these characters in the film. Because while Louise Mathews was trying to write a good bit of a children's book, you know, trying to explain how, of course, to the parents why children are basically acting this way and becoming this, you know, this basically this, you know, being so imaginative and being so, you know, childish, and actually becomes so much hatred on themselves. It's pretty obvious nowadays. It's just going to show today we're just having more children just basically sending them off to boot camp. But that's not the whole base I'm saying. The whole point is that usually it's she's explaining to, you know, the parents and the children themselves is that sometimes when you're a child you feel kind of different. You feel kind of odd originally, and that's really, I think, I found the story very well fascinating originally. While the movie, it just played for laughs, it just played for just having fun, and of course it does really give it a very well interesting to see it, to see the characters, how they react to other characters. But I think that scene when we see all the children basically in the park while they're reading Harriet's notebook, you know, reading all the negative stuff that she wrote about them and everything else, and, you know, while that really is sort of kind of like true in many ways, it doesn't really play that much often well. And I think that's a main problem for both the movie and the book. While the book, it actually very well strong and very well heartbreaking moment because, you know, we do see, of course, old Gully has left town. We see, you know, Harriet lost in her precious notebook by the entire base of the kids that are reading the negative stuff that she's written about them. And we see her basically get so emotional and so deeply in pain, and even basically so hatred on herself. Even she even goes to the psychotherapist, that even she looks at the psychotherapist thinking, why would I basically want to basically go to a psychotherapist when I'm clearly just basically upset because A, I'm growing up, B, I'm losing my, of course, my limits, and you just don't have no appreciation for what I do. I mean, you know, in the story, her parents really try to understand her, but it's very well obvious that she is a completely different person. And that's what I think the book simultaneously that Reese was explaining to people who back in the 60s were trying to understand, is that it's just because the typical young, typical 11-year-old girl is trying to become as a writer and want to have goals and dreams of life, and you know, it goes to show you that it's not just based on this, that. It's just basically shows that a character has to change he or she or her limits. And it's pretty obvious that many of fictional characters that we're reading today, it's pretty obvious that we are have much different lives, different gender, different, food that we eat or whatever, it goes to show you that explaining to that towards a story, it really kind of brings down to basis of the people. And, of course, and maybe kind of, teach people a lesson, Richard, back then. But the one thing I really did not understand, and this is something my theory, Richard, towards my understanding about the book and the film, originally, is that when Harriet gets her letter with Old Gully and tells basically her friends and other children basically that sometimes you have to lie, otherwise you will lose a friend. Little lies do not hurt people, would make them feel. Like, for instance, like you cook something that people would make for you and you don't like it. So for yourself, you will always tell the truth. Which, I never understand that. But here's the thing, there is a point that you can tell a lie and make some minor changes in your life. Even if you are hurting somebody's feelings or basically feel like they're not really generally basically like this kind of thing, it's kind of hard to lie in some ways. So to my sense, she did really tell the truth. She did really, of course, apologize, but she probably lied basically because she understands that she is continuing basically just writing about wherever it comes to her mind. And when we write about other people or write about ourselves, we feel kind of different. We feel kind of like we want to, of course, to make things different for our lives. And I think that's generally why I'm doing this review, because I want to explain to some people who don't even know much about the story itself, because the story is very well driven and very well, surprisingly, feel to it. Because to me, it got to me understanding about the meaning base of how people are different in living a life, how people react to basically other people, how people treat people other differently, how they just don't respect other people, what they do. It just goes along to show you that we're just a completely different human beings, that we have no remorse of whatsoever what to change our lives. So that being said, it may be kind of harsh in my book, and for my own representative for my own speaking, but to be fair, it's always about really just basically, of course, try to basically get to know what the person's feeling, how the people think, how the people really have mixed feelings about it. So yeah, I have no connection whatsoever what people think about me, or basically don't have no issues about it. But the only thing I will have to say is it's pretty obvious not everybody is basically will be the same. Everybody has different life. Everybody has different ways in their own personal and basically their own way to basically live it. So I see no convincing point to that. So yeah, I did talk about a little bit about myself and a little bit of how, basically how the world has changed so much. I guess I didn't really actually talk about the other books, which I have, of course, Harriet Spies Again, and I guess Along the Secret. Now, Along with the Secret, it's quite really different originally. I think the actual story that, we see Harriet and Beth Ellen spend a summer vacation with one another and actually, try to see what's going on in the neighborhood there, because, they spend time with another trying to get to know each other and everything else. And I think it's actually the fear of the future, basically, before Harriet started really explaining herself and actually why she wants to become as a writer and why she's spying about around the neighborhood. So that explains a lot, Richard, towards the basic in the second book, which I quite recommend for anybody who can just check it out and actually really enjoy it. For Spies Again, it's quite not as a sequel, but as a prequel. I see it as a prequel because, when you read it, it's very well driven and very well to see, of course, Old Gully coming back version in the base of the prequel. So it really plays a lot. But the only thing I find pretty obvious is we do see Harriet a little bit more understanding about her history of why she's, writing about these things that she wrote in her notebook and why she wants to become as a writer. Because she's so much working and busy with so much thoughts that she wrote in her notebook. It's pretty obvious, very well driven, Richard, to me. And I only read the basis about once, Richard, when it came out. I think it really came out in 2005 or 2006. I think the book came out originally sometime in that year originally. I don't remember. But the only thing I find pretty much about these the prequel, it's quite really derivative if you read it originally. So definitely worth checking out originally. There is another Harriet the Spy book, which is called Harriet the Spy Double Agent, which I never read originally, and I don't know originally, I never heard much about reviews of it. But I know it's quite really good, and I know it's quite very well, a little different in some ways. It's not much originally about Harriet, a little bit often. She just basically goes around the spying basically, of course, with the classmates, and basically have, I guess, a double agent around their side originally. I never read how much about it, but I know it's quite really interesting, and I'll definitely like to check that out. Now, have I ever seen the blog or the, I guess, the pretty much remake of the Harriet the Spy franchise story? Well, I can say one thing about it is that I think the one character has, you know, much more, I guess, a little bit more scenes to do, and that was basically the actress who played Beth Ellen, and that's it. While Harriet's Spy Blog Wars, it featured based on a feature-length film. It was, of course, produced by, of course, Disney Channel, which I was never quite understanding why in the hell did they actually basically make some kind of a remake. Now, if they were going to remake a actual film basically maybe on the book, that's fine. I can understand that they're trying to do that. But why are you doing it in a feature-length pass? First of all, no one's going to basically blog a very well-considered story that no one's going to have interest in. And B, I'm not going to get started basically talking about it because since I don't have it in my collection, I'm just explaining to you why I think I just never really understand why the film itself just doesn't have no driven to it. And really doesn't play along with it because, you know, the actress played Harriet, Julia Stone, I think that's her name is, not a bad actress, but have a bad vision for her character. Have her base her characters is basically straightforward, basically be as a spy, spying around the neighborhood, and then also blogs about it on her blog. Like, what? But yeah, I think that's the only thing that's the reason why I never really understand about it, and I'll never watch it ever again, because it's still just basically driven why I think it's never really interesting, and I don't know why people find it very well a good movie, and I don't see it as a bad or a horrible movie. It's a very complex movie, and it's not really making any much sense at all. Especially with the characters that are not interestingly funny, not interesting. All they just basically just random basically supporting characters. The only supporting character I can basically give is Beth Ellen, the actress who play it, and that's it. So yeah, that's it for me and you for now. So until next time, this is Eric Run. Thank you for watching, and sayonara. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I think it's about time we can review another basically review. This time around, we can talk about none other than one of my all-time favorite movies, and personally, one of these movies I watched as a kid, Harriet the Spy. Yes, folks, I basically want to talk about maybe a little personal about the film itself and my experience basically watching it, and of course, Richard, why this movie has been one of my all-time favorites. So that's what we're going to talk about today on Friends Want to Be Reviews. Welcome back. Okie dokie. Well, what can I say about Harriet the Spy? It's probably been one of the most unknowing and non-based fictional books of all time. Thanks to, of course, the reviews we excuse. I guess the original, my thoughts about the book and generally, and the film simultaneously, it's quite not the same as the book tells it. Now, the reason why I mentioned this, and the reason why I'm telling you this, is because, well, the book itself is actually pretty well a little bit more kind of harsh in many ways, I mean, there's some moments that you find it very well fascinating about reading it. Now, we do see the part, Richard, that we all know that a young disabled 11-year-old girl, very well driven basically story, because Louise Recuse is basically saying that the characters, like of course Harriet, she's very well, I don't want to say bullied, but also being real, like herself, Richard, and basically was fool herself by simply actually kind of really go on and basically do things on her own. Because, of course, back in the early 60s, Louise was trying to, of course, create a story that, many children can naturally can relate to, or, can parents really can advise how children react to other children usually towards age and gender. And it's pretty obvious that the story is quite driven. The only thing I will base about bad thing about it is because we do see Harriet have these temper tantrums. Like she's causing Mason use of word, certain language that probably maybe child never should have. Basically going to a psychotherapist. I mean, there's a psychotherapist, both the book and the movie simultaneously, because, I mean, you don't really have that kind of way with many other children's books, because, Louise, she's very well considered as a writer who is trying to get inside the material of a child, and I think that's what driven to me when I started reading it, and I was very well kind of fascinated of it. And it's pretty obvious that she's really going on and focused on Richard, even if she is basically have much more common sense between basically the parents and the child himself. So, for my theory based towards the book and the movie, it's sort of like really just basically having your kids trying to learn from the experience and basically having an tangible experience about, being able to deal with life, and actually have a corporate basis with your family and friends. Now, I will say for the movie, on the other hand, is that it's pretty obvious it's very well similar towards the book. But here's the difference. And I don't think that books don't really follow the movie simultaneously, because the books are very well driven towards it, especially for Harry Potter. I mean, Harry Potter has been very well considered for popularity towards the books, and very well getting a ton of basically franchise based on the movies. Well, I'll get to that original into the later original on originally. But the real thing I will say about the movie is, it's very obvious that you don't get a driven movies somewhat like this towards the book. While the movie is more really some elements of basic fun and just goofiness and just a little bit of whack and a little bit of sadness, which is scenes that you're watching, it's pretty well driven, really, just a little bit. The only thing difference about the movie is just because there are some parts that are not really a kind of like moon to me. And I know a lot of people who have watched the movie and basically read the book simultaneously don't necessarily have to take a chance to just basically, tell the children originally that, even when you are different, you feel kind of different. You feel kind of odd, Rishi, in your way. Because Harriet and, and other basic characters in the book and the film itself are quite different, Rishi, in so many ways. Like, of course, we have the boy with the purple who wants to become as a writer. And of course, she basically goes around in her neighborhood in New York City, basically just spies around her basically relatives, well, not relatives, spies around our neighborhood, and eventually, basically write down everything that she knows in her trusted basically little notebook. Now, for me, how I got involved in basically reading the book was somehow originally, it pretty much got to me understanding about writing, journaling and everything else, originally, because back in the early course of the 90s, I used to write my own kind of spy notebooks back in that time, and I kind of like found this book very well interesting to me, which is to basically understand about how can children react when they feel emotional or feel kind of like lonely, or basically don't have really this no communicating whatsoever with their friends. It's pretty obvious why this book is pretty much generated to me to understand about the meaning about basically as a child. But the only thing I will say about the film itself is there are some elements which that you find very well fascinating, with which, of course, in a scene wherein, we see trusted little big character Sport, played by, I forgot what his name was, but he plays by that character Richard somewhere, plays that guy Richard, whatever his name is. But he goes to the basically local food grocery store, and he's basically, of course, paying his groceries, like his milk, his cheese, and all this stuff, versus that he's basically trying to pay off to basically buy some food for his father and everything else. And it's pretty obvious that you look at the characters very well listed, because, for Harriet, she's more as the know-it-all, trying to know everything about what's going on in the world and everything else. And she wants to, because, know everything that she knows by simply write down in her notebook. For Sport, himself, he's more as a kind of like the main, kind of basically supporting character, who just basically, tried to be supportive and everything else, basically. And of course, basically living on him with his basically his divorced father, who is becoming as a writer himself, realize that he's trying to help out with with the bills, with, of course, with the cooking and everything else, which, everybody day in life usually do that in their own life. For myself, I do that usually too, because for my own personal reference of my own life, I used to be like that kind of way, because, me and my mother never had much money back in the time when I was getting a little bit older. We never had much, basically, more food, based on the table. I mean, we wasn't really poor. We wasn't seriously was poor and loneliness and, of course, homeless. We were simply trying to live by day, everyday life, by saving enough money for food and basically, of course, pay the bills. Because, of course, Richard, for Sport, him being as a supporting character, I really find him very well relatable. Because, for everyday life where we live in, we always have a moment that we are just basically unmensurably just cannot afford enough for other people that we basically are, of course, basically generated from what comes around. So for the book, I really find it very well, fun to read, because it's not just basically, the temper tantrums of a child,